The turkey was still on the table when my sister stood up. I had driven 4 hours from Delwood to be there. I'd sat through the prayer, the side dishes, the small talk about weather and a cousin's new apartment. I had a glass in my hand, vodka, neat, poured because something in the room had felt tilted since I walked through the door and I didn't yet know why. Renee pushed her chair back and placed both palms flat on the tablecloth. She had the posture of someone who had rehearsed. My aunt looked up. My uncle set down his fork. My father, at the head of the table, kept his eyes on his plate. "I want to say something," Renee said, "because I think everyone here deserves to know." I watched her. The back of my neck went cool, the way it does when a room changes temperature without a window opening. "Dad has decided," she said, and she was already smiling before the sentence was finished, "that the company belongs with someone who was actually there from the beginning. He's transferring ownership to me. Full ownership." She looked down the table at me. "I know that's hard to hear. But you were barely out of school when this started. You were still a child, really." There was a breath of silence, the particular silence of people who have heard something they were not prepared to hear. I looked at my father. He still had not looked up. I took a sip of my vodka. I set the glass down without making a sound. Something settled in my sternum. Not outrage, not disbelief, something quieter and more useful than either of those things. I said, "Should I tell them now? Or do you want to?" "My name is Caleb Morrow. I am 31 years old. I have lived in Delwood, Ohio for most of my life, and for the last 6 years I have run a commercial facilities maintenance company out of Kettle Ridge Business Park on the east side of town. I am not the kind of person who talks much about what I've built. In Delwood, that kind of talk moves fast and comes back to you sideways, so I kept my head down, did the work, and let the contracts speak. The company had a name, Morrow Property Services, and it had an operating agreement on file with Fenwick County, and it had a valuation of $724,000 as of the last operating year. Those are the facts that matter for this story. My father, Gerald Morrow, is 63. He worked 30 years in mid-level logistics management before he retired, and he is a man who understands hierarchy above almost anything else. He respects credentials and titles and the appearance of order. He also, I came to understand slowly over many years, respects whichever person in the room is talking most confidently at any given moment, regardless of whether that confidence has any foundation. Renee is his favorite. She has always been his favorite. I don't say that with bitterness, it is simply a structural fact of our family that most people in it would acknowledge if pressed. She is 4 years older than me, she has his coloring, she shares his way of moving through a room. When they walk into a gathering together, they look like a matched set. I started Morrow Property Services when I was 25. I had finished a 2-year apprenticeship with a local contractor, and I had saved $9,200. And I had an idea about commercial building maintenance that I believed in enough to sign a personal loan guarantee for $18,340 worth of equipment on the strength of one verbal commitment from a property manager at Kettle Ridge who said he'd give me a shot if I could show up and do the work properly. I drove to that first meeting in the truck with the slipping transmission, parked in the visitor lot, and walked in with a single-page proposal I had typed and printed at the Delwood Library the night before. The property manager, a man named Dennis Falk, looked it over for about 90 seconds. He said he'd seen worse pitches. He shook my hand. That handshake was the whole business in that moment. Renee was living in Columbus at the time, working in marketing. My father was 2 years from retirement. Neither of them had any involvement in the formation of the company. I filed the operating agreement myself, took a bus to the Fenwick Community Hall to get the notary stamp, and carried the intake envelope home in my backpack because I didn't have a briefcase. That envelope went into the bottom drawer of my desk at Kettle Ridge the day I moved into the office. I have not moved it since. That is where this started. The first 2 years were lean in the way that makes lean sound too mild a word. I ran the accounts, managed the scheduling, did the physical work alongside whoever I'd hired that week, and drove myself to estimates in a truck with a transmission that slipped in second gear. I paid the equipment loan on time every month before I paid anything else because my name was on that guarantee and I understood what that meant. By the end of the third year, I had 6 regular commercial contracts, a crew of 4, and enough operating cushion that I could draw a modest salary without feeling like I was pulling the floor out from under the business. I had not taken a vacation. I had not asked for help. I had made every hire, written every proposal, resolved every client complaint myself. There were months where the margin between solvent and not was a single delayed invoice, and I managed each of those months the same way. One decision at a time, nothing borrowed that I couldn't account for. My father retired during that third year. He had time on his hands, and he had opinions, which is a combination I should have been more careful about. He started coming by the Kettle Ridge office occasionally at first, a few times a month, asking questions, looking at the equipment, nodding in a way that suggested he found things satisfactory. I welcomed it. I thought it was interest. Gradually, and I can see now how deliberately it happened, he began introducing himself to people as being involved in the business. Not as an owner, he was careful about that, but as someone who was part of the operation in a way that implied weight. At a contractor's lunch at a property management firm, he told the room he had helped get the company off the ground. The room took that to mean something. I heard about it third hand and I let it pass, because he was my father and the goodwill cost me nothing I could see at the time. Renee's involvement began when she moved back to Delwood. She had left the Columbus marketing job and she needed something to do, and my father suggested she help with the company's client communications. I agreed. I gave her a title on a business card, Client Relations Coordinator, and I paid her a part-time rate for work that was genuinely helpful in the beginning. Within 8 months, Renee had begun presenting herself to clients as a co-founder. Not in writing, she was careful about that too, but in conversation, in the way she answered questions when clients called. She told one property manager that she and I had built the company together from the start. She told another that she was the one who had handled the business side while I handled the physical work. A third client called me directly to clarify something Renee had apparently told him about pricing authority, that she had final sign-off on contract terms. I told him she did not. I had a conversation with her about it. She said she was just simplifying things for people who didn't need the full history. She said I was being territorial. She said, and this is the word that stays with me, that she was just trying to help. I said nothing. I looked at her across the table and I let the silence settle where it needed to. I let it go. That is the part one carry now, not as punishment but as instruction. The meeting happened on a Wednesday 6 weeks before Thanksgiving. I found out about it because my father called me the following Thursday to tell me he was planning to make some changes to the business structure. He said it in the tone he uses when he has already decided something and is informing, not consulting. He said Renee had raised some concerns about the long-term direction of the company. He said he thought it made sense to formalize her role. Formalize it how? I said. Give her more standing, he said. She's put a lot into this. Something went tight across my shoulders, not a warning, not a reflex, a recognition. Like hearing a word in a language you've been pretending not to speak. Dad, I said, she's been part-time for 8 months. She didn't start the company. She didn't sign the loan. She's not on the operating agreement. You were young when you started, he said. You needed guidance. She's been providing that. What guidance? Caleb. His voice shifted into something smooth and final. You've always been ungrateful for the support around you. That's something you need to examine. I stayed quiet for a moment. I asked him to tell me specifically what changes he had in mind. He said he thought Renee should be listed as a co-owner. He said it was a family business and it should reflect that. It's not a family business, I said. It's my business. I filed it. I funded it. My name is on every contract. You're being very rigid about this, he said. I'm being accurate, I said. This is exactly what I mean, he said. You treat this like it belongs to you alone. Your sister has given years to this. 8 months, I said. Part-time. He said he was going to talk to someone about the paperwork and that I should think about whether I wanted to be cooperative about this or make it difficult for everyone. Then he said goodbye and ended the call. I stood in the Kettle Ridge office with the phone in my hand. The fluorescent overhead was buzzing at a frequency I had never noticed before. I set the phone on the desk. I thought about the manila envelope in the bottom drawer, the one with the Fenwick County intake stamp on the back flap. I knew what was in it. I knew what it said and whose name was on it. I did not call back. The dinner where it surfaced before Thanksgiving was a Sunday supper at Carver Street, just the four of us, my father, Renee, my mother, and me. My mother had made pot roast and she had set the table carefully and she did not know anything was coming. Renee brought it up over the meal, casually, the way you mention a plan that's already been settled. She said she had been looking at some things with Dad and that she thought the company had so much more potential with the right structure behind it. She said she had ideas. She looked at me with something arranged behind her eyes that wasn't quite warmth. I think it could be really special, she said, if we approached it as a true partnership. My mother looked at me. I took a drink of water. The glass was cold against my palm. What does that mean? I said. It means I want to be involved, Renee said. Really involved. The way I should have been from the start, honestly. You weren't there from the start, I said. Caleb, my father said, just the name, the way he used it to signal that he considered a line to have been crossed. Silence sat over the table for a moment. My mother moved the serving dish 2 inches to the left without a reason. You're being ungrateful, my father said, for everything your sister has contributed. I did not answer. I finished my meal. I helped clear the plates. I drove to Kettle Ridge that night. I unlocked the office door and turned on the light over the desk. I pulled the bottom drawer open. I moved the hanging folders to the left until I found the manila envelope with the Fenwick County intake stamp on the back flap. I lifted it out and set it on the desk. I sat down. I turned the envelope over and ran my thumb along the back flap where the stamp was pressed, feeling the slight raised edge of the ink. I looked at the green ink smear along the bottom edge of the signature page. The notary's stamp had pressed while the ink was still wet, and it had left a long curved smear that I had never bothered to care about because the document was valid and the smear didn't change anything. I opened my laptop. I looked up the Ohio Secretary of State's business entity search. I typed in the company name. The filing came up. I looked at the single member listed under the operating agreement. I closed the laptop. I put the envelope in my jacket's inner pocket. I turned off the light. I locked the door. I drove back toward Carver Street. Thanksgiving morning. The table still had the dishes from the night before stacked at one end. My mother was in the kitchen. My father was in his chair in the living room with the news on. Renee had stayed the night in her old room. I set my coffee cup down on the sideboard. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I took out the manila envelope. I opened the flap and slid out my phone, pulled up the Ohio Secretary of State business entity page I had bookmarked the night before, and turned the screen so the filing was visible. Single member, Caleb Morrow, filing date, status, active. I laid the envelope flat on the table, the operating agreement visible beside it, the Fenwick County intake stamp facing up. Renee came downstairs at 8:14 a.m. She stopped when she saw what was on the table. My father came in from the living room. What is this? He said. The operating agreement, I said. And the state filing. I thought we should look at them together. Renee looked at the papers and then at our father. Dad, she said. This isn't necessary, my father said. I think it is, I said. My father sat down across from me. Caleb. We can handle this like adults. We are handling it like adults, I said. That's why I brought the documents. Renee said, you're making this into something it doesn't need to be. Tell me what it needs to be, I said. It's a family conversation, she said. It doesn't need lawyers and paperwork. You announced in front of 8 people last night that Dad had given you full ownership of my company, I said. That needed a response. I was sharing what Dad told me, she said. I looked at my father. He said, I may have spoken before I understood the full picture. The full picture, I said, is in those documents. I founded this company. I signed a personal loan guarantee for $18,340 to buy the equipment it runs on. The operating agreement was filed with my name as the sole member. Renee has been a part-time employee for 8 months. That is the full picture. You're being very black and white about this, my father said. You announced something in front of the family, I said. I'm clarifying what's actually true. Renee said, you've always made me feel like an outsider in this family's business. The business isn't the family's, I said. It's mine. I never said otherwise. That's exactly the problem, she said. The ungrateful one is you. You never acknowledged what we gave you. I said nothing. I looked at the operating agreement on the table in front of me. I looked at the green ink smear at the bottom of the signature page, the one the notary's stamp had pressed before the ink was dry. I had looked at that smear 100 times. It meant nothing except that the document was real and had been handled by human hands on a specific day in a specific county office, and that was exactly enough. You told 8 people last night that Dad gave you something that legally does not belong to him to give, I said. You told them I was getting nothing. You told them I was still a child when this started. I paused. I was 25. I had a loan guarantee and 1 verbal commitment and a bus ticket to the county clerk. That's what I built this from. Renee opened her mouth. My father put his hand up. I said, I'm not asking you to agree with me. The state filing doesn't require your agreement. I picked up the operating agreement. I held it. You gave me a title on a business card, Renee said, her voice dropping. I did, I said. And I paid you for the work you did. That's what that was. My father said slowly, what do you want to happen now? I want the announcement from last night to be corrected, I said. With the same people present. And I want to be clear about one thing. I set the document back on the table. I'm not ungrateful. I know exactly what I built and what it cost, and it cost me things that were mine to spend. My father looked at the document for a long moment. He did not touch it. He pushed his chair back and stood up and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room. No one spoke. Renee looked at her hands. My mother came to the doorway of the kitchen, saw the table, and quietly went back. My father said to the window, I'll make the calls. I nodded. I picked up my coffee cup from the sideboard. 6 months passed. Morrow Property Services took on 2 new commercial accounts in the first quarter. I hired a project coordinator, someone who had applied, interviewed, and been selected through a normal process. I signed the offer letter at my desk at Kettle Ridge on a Tuesday morning, and I put it in the outbox myself. I had the Kettle Ridge lease renewed for another 3 years in February. I signed that too at the same desk with the same pen I keep in the top drawer, a ballpoint with a cracked cap that I've been meaning to replace for 2 years and probably won't. The manila envelope with the Fenwick County intake stamp on the back flap lives in the bottom drawer of my desk now. I take it out sometimes when I'm doing year-end paperwork, not to look at it with anything ceremonial, but because the drawer sticks and it tends to shift toward the front, and I end up moving it when I need to get to the folders behind it. It has a coffee ring on the back corner now from when I set a mug on it without thinking during a long estimate review last February. Renee sent a message in March. It came through my personal number, not the business line, and it was 2 sentences. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she hoped we could find our way back to something. I read it the morning it came in. I did not reply. The phone went back in my pocket, and I walked into the Kettle Ridge office, and I poured a cup of coffee, and I went over the week's schedule. My mother still calls on Sundays. We talk about ordinary things. The weather, the garden she keeps on the Carver Street property, a book she's reading. My father has not called. I expect he won't for a while, and I find I can hold that without it taking up too much space. What I learned, slowly and at some cost, is that a document does not protect you from the people who want to rewrite the story. It only gives you something to set on the table when they do. The work is the record. The county stamp is the record. The 6 years of showing up and doing the thing. That is the record, and it does not require anyone's signature but the one already on file. The manila envelope is still there, coffee ring and all. I built what I built and the county stamped it, and that is the part no one gets to rework. If this story reached you at the right moment, pass it on to someone who needed to hear it.